VAT Option to tax. What is it all about and when can you make use of it? Hi, I'm Kimberly Shapcott, qualified chartered accountant, property investor and entrepreneur. Let's sit down and have a chat. VAT option to tax. Now, this is one of those areas of VAT and tax that is quite misunderstood. So let's go through some of the basics today to give us an idea of what the VAT option to tax is, what it does and how it works. An option to tax can be quite beneficial on certain properties. However, we do just need to make sure that we know the risks attached to this as well, so that we are informed in our decision. The first question we probably need to ask ourselves is, why would you choose an option to tax on a property? Now, most supplies of land and buildings are actually exempt for VAT purposes, so we can't actually VAT register or do anything with it. If a person does make exempt supplies, then they're unable to reclaim input VAT, which is basically the VAT you pay on anything you purchase in relation to those supplies, so that property income. By opting to tax a building, you are basically saying that this is now taxable, so I'm going to charge 20% VAT on any rent that I charge, but that also means that then you can reclaim any expenses relating to that building back as well. So that may be telephone bills, it may be accountancy fees, it may be electricity costs, it may be refurbishment costs potentially on a project. So there is a reason why option to tax may be useful. This leads us to the question of what is covered by the option to tax. And the key thing here is it's only for commercial properties. So only commercial properties can have an option to tax applied to them. It does not, specifically, it does not apply to dwellings. So residential property, you cannot apply for an option to tax on a residential property. And an important technicality to make sure you are aware of is that it is a person's interest in land or property that is opted to tax, not the land and building themselves. This specifically means that if the property is sold, that the option to tax is not transferred with the land or property, because it is the person that is opting to tax, not the building. If the new person who owns the building wants to an option to tax, they themselves will need to apply for an option to tax. So that is a very technicality point, but a very, very important one to just understand how the option to tax legislation works. It is possible to have an option to tax on land and buildings, and if you've got land, you can opt to tax a specific area of land, which then means when a building is built on that land, it means that that building will automatically be incorporated into the option to tax. Although it is also possible to exclude a new building from the option to tax by notifying HM Revenue and Customs. And vice versa, if there is a building on some land and the building is knocked down and there was an option to tax on the building, then there will be an option to tax on the land that the building stood on, and to any future building that may also be rebuilt on that same land. So as you can see, there's a few technicalities here with how the option to tax applies on property, on land, and where the land or property changes over that period of time of ownership by that person who has the option to tax. So how do you go about getting an option to tax if it's the right thing for you? There are two stages to an option to tax, and the first one is the decision and the second one is the notification. So let's dive into the decision first. And the decision is quite literally just, I've decided that I want to opt to tax the building. So you make the decision. It is a decision that you make and look at documenting. You need to make a clear documentation of the option to tax and the decision that is made. This will include the date of the decision, the specific area of land or building that you are opting to tax, to make it very clear of what has been decided, what has been sorted, so you've got that evidence in the future should you need to come back to it. This leads then on to the second part of the process, which is the notification, which is obviously to HM Revenue and Customs. Now, HMRC should be notified within 30 days of that decision, although they may accept a late notification if there is specific reasons why that notification has been made late. The form to use is VAT Form 1614A, and this can be completed using the link in the description below. And I would keep a copy of that form to show as the evidence that this notification has been made, as HMRC has been lacking in providing any documentary evidence back to you. So that's the notification to them. Keep hold of that, and as of that day, that will give you the evidence for your options tax to then start charging VAT to any tenants in that building, because the building is VATable for anyone who rents that property moving forward. So how long does an options tax last? Well, an options tax can be revoked after 20 years. So we are now past the 20-year mark for the first options tax properties. So some of them out in the world may have been revoked now, but the key date here is that it's 20 years from the date of the decision will be the point where an options tax can be revoked. There is also an automatic point where an options tax is revoked, which is 6 years after the person who has the options tax no longer has an interest in the property. So this may be you've sold the property to somebody else, you're no longer involved in it, the option will automatically be revoked after that 6-year period. There is also a cooling off period. So if you decide to do an options tax and then find maybe you were going to rent to a commercial business who was VAT registered, and now your property is no longer suitable for them, and you maybe have a charity who is no longer registered for VAT. It therefore may be that you change your mind. So there is this cooling off period, which is 6 months after your decision, and provided HMRC are notified and there's been no taxable supplies that have been delivered up until the point the option took place, then you have no issues with arguably revoking it within that 6-month cooling off period as well. There is some additional criteria for revoking an options tax, but we're not going to dive into that because that is going into the very nitty-gritty detail today. But hopefully a few of those have just given you an idea of the high-level points to be aware of for an option to tax. As an options tax lasts for 20 years, it is very important that you make the right decision if it is right to do an options tax on a property. The key thing here is you're probably going to be working with commercial VAT registered businesses with your commercial property. So on that basis, there is little impact from the VAT for the business. If you're having non-registered businesses in your commercial property, then you may just want to consider whether it's the right move for you to be having to charge VAT to those tenants. If the building is mixed use, then there may be things like partial exemption to have to contemplate and deal with if you are opting to VAT the whole building. So there is a few quirky considerations you may need to just work through to make sure that it is the right decision. But for those that it works for, it may be a perfect decision and a way of reclaiming some of the VAT on some of the work that you have done on the building. So what I would say is make sure you're speaking to your advisor, discuss this with an appropriate tax advisor or accountant who can talk you through how it fits together so that you can make the right decision for you and your property business. The ability to revoke the option once it is in place after the cooling off period is limited. Therefore, the right decision needs to be made at the time, and appropriate discussion should be held before you make any decision so that you can make sure it works for you and your goals with your property business. Hopefully today you've discovered what the VAT options tax is and how it works, at least in the simplest form that we can explain today. If you have any questions, then please do leave a comment. Please like the video and do subscribe to the channel. And let's make tax less taxing. less taxes.